Hi, we've got Ray Fawcett here, CTO of Capital Economics, telling us about some of his experiences in a content-led business. So Ray, hello. First question. What are the greatest challenges in building out a modern content business? You know, think about things like the silos, the tech, the integration, the content taxonomy, that sort of stuff.
So, well, I mean, we can cover quite a lot. There's always a lot of problems. Well, if you want to talk about, integration is obviously a common one nowadays, because anything you do with CMS technology or any technology really needs to always be interconnected. So that's always more and more of a requirement. People want to integrate their analytics, their CRM systems, their CMS systems, everything connects together to then form the sort of end-to-end view of the customer experience. So particularly for smaller companies, integration is actually quite often almost either off limits or very expensive and difficult, just because, if you have to build custom integration, you've got to maintain it. And then, obviously as well, with all the will in the world, it can be expensive if, things change or new versions of software come out, where the integration has to be actually updated to cater for that. So that's always a problem, especially in small businesses. So we obviously try and avoid it as much as possible and use off-the-shelf modules wherever we can. I think in our case, there's obviously the siloing is an issue. We've obviously got a team that produces the content and then a team that sells the content. Nearly always it's quite difficult to get alignment between the two because they've got very different views. One is looking at it from a view of how can I sell it to the customer, and the other one is looking at it more from a purist view in terms of what content needs to be included to actually give the complete picture of what I'm actually trying to describe. So there are different viewpoints in terms of how that content should be produced. So in terms of the other thing that's really relevant for us, obviously, is a much more flexible paywall. And I think that's becoming more and more common in most businesses. Certainly when I was at my last company as well, that was exactly the same thing, where the paywall was moving from being binary to being much more role orientated, with specific requirements around what people may or may not want to do given different types of customer, different times, different locations. And that flexibility is becoming more and more frequently common, where you actually need to be able to do sort of custom targeting on content beyond what you used to be able to do, which was just, can you access it or not? So I'd say those are the three things that seem to come up a lot, both within this business and some of the other businesses I've worked with. It's always an increasing problem or set of problems that continually reoccur.
Okay, I'll ask you another question. Having seen publishing transition into a fully digital enterprise, where are the opportunities for growth in the future?
Well, I think, for us, it's going to probably be Asia and America. I think obviously we're already doing quite a bit in America already, but obviously there's a greater opportunity there. But I think a lot of the other markets, such as Singapore, China, Japan's another one where, there's a lot of opportunity there. They do come with different limitations though. Like it's quite hard to sell. It's quite easy to sell English content in China, but it's quite hard to sell English content in Japan. People expect native Japanese. So I think in those regards, certainly one of the challenges we will have probably is when we push more on doing different types of translation on the content. So I think that'll be one challenge. I think the other opportunity is probably to actually radically improve the engagement in terms of how the customers actually interact with our content. So people spending more time on site. And I think part of that is going to be the content becoming richer. So it's going to be things more like video content, audio content, and blending it with the existing content that we already produce to create greater engagement. And obviously the more engaged the customer is, the more likely they are to buy more products or potentially engage us for a consultancy or any other number of other things. So definitely actually the richness of the content and actually the effectively the global nature of our business are two things that will create good opportunities for us for the future.
Okay, thanks. What about where do you think most digital content businesses get it wrong? Is it the commercial model, customer centricity, content taxonomy? Where do you think?
I think more on the customer side. I think certainly where I've seen things go wrong is where people focus too much on the product and not on the customer use cases. And I think we've been guilty of that in the past ourselves, where we effectively present the content in the same way that we produce it around, we've got different types of specialist content editors who produce content for different types of topic. But actually a lot of the time, in terms of how the customer is sold the content and how they consume it, it's more that customers have specific use cases or problems that they're trying to use the content to solve. So I think structuring your website and your content around trying to solve those customer problems rather than around how the content's produced and how the product is structured actually is probably a lot more sensible. So try and focus more on the customer rather than actually the the product or the individual features of the product you produce.
Okay. And where's the most interesting content technology now?
I'm not really sure about which technologies. I mean, obviously, video is the big thing we're doing more of at the moment. So I think we're starting to push far more into doing video and also interactive data. I think it's the other big one for us. There's lots of different tools around that, and obviously Drupal as our CMS obviously is very cutting edge. So I mean, I think for me, I think the real opportunities now beyond just standard content production are actually in interactive data and video. I think those are the two things that people are expecting more and more, and they want that sort of richness and the depth of the engagement in that content.
And I think, well, before we press record, you were actually talking about speed versus spend and all of this, but where do you sit on in-house versus system integrator?
So my personal view is, I think a hybrid model works best. Certainly for, I would say, up to sort of small, medium-sized businesses. If you're a very large publishing company, there's a very good argument for them doing everything in-house. But I think even then it's quite thin nowadays, because most businesses don't really want to be maintaining or building their own CMS system. So I think it's better to try and have a sort of mixed model. Certainly for us, we have to have a hybrid model because there's not probably enough consistent demand to have big teams in-house. And also we need that burstability. So we need to be able to flex the demand. So, you know, when new projects come in or there's requirements, being able to actually have a supplier that can actually supply us with more people for a short period of time to complete a piece of work quickly and then scale back down is really valuable for us. And I think it gives us more flexibility over contractors as well in that regard. So, I mean, in terms of the other two models, so fully outsourced, I said you'd have to be a very big company to justify it. And even then, I think these days that's becoming less and less common because it's quite often not worth the hassle. You know, it's people moving more and more towards SaaS services and managed services. I don't think it's really that great these days. And then the fully outsourced model, I'm not a massive fan of because I think it's, well, two things. I think, you know, obviously you want to be able to keep the operational costs low. So when you're doing new stuff that can be CapEx, I think that's great. But obviously if you want to just do general operational stuff, it can be quite expensive playing supplier rates. So obviously having day-to-day things done in-house can keep costs down. Plus, I think it's always important to have a reasonable in-house knowledge of what suppliers are doing and why they're doing it a certain way and making sure you actually manage them in the correct way. So that works. I think the other thing, obviously, as well with fully in-house teams is that especially these days, people don't tend to stay as long. Obviously, staff cycle is at an all-time high where, you know, people are moving on after a 12 to 18 months quite frequently now. So retaining that knowledge and having that training overhead in-house could be quite expensive. So, you know, having a supplier that's stable that can manage that for us actually works quite well. So yeah, so it's strange enough, actually, I wouldn't say in-house versus system integrator. It's probably, I'd say somewhere in the middle is probably the right answer.
All right. Thanks, Ray. Thanks very much.
No problem.